Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Dr. Andrew Murray, who is the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer at the European Tour Group. Andrew, thank you for joining.
Pleasure.
So a couple of people have mentioned that I should get you on here, so I'm looking forward to today, but there's obviously no pressure on that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing that. You've got a really interesting history, and not just alongside the actual your day job, so to speak. So I'm looking forward to going into that. But just talk to me a bit about where you're from and how you got involved in medicine.
Yeah, and first of all, it's great to be on the podcast. You've had some terrific guests before. Many great listens, so I'd encourage listeners to go back and check those out. I'm from Aberdeen, from the frozen north of Scotland, and moved out to Kenya when I was 2, and then I've lived in different parts of the world. So I've spent time living in Kenya, in America, and New Zealand, Australia, and various other places. But I'm back now living in Edinburgh, where I work for the University of Edinburgh as one of their consultants in sport and exercise medicine, and then look after various professional sports organisations, especially the DP World Tour, European Tour Group Golf. So I think that my parents are both doctors. They worked out in a mission hospital in Kenya. Really liked what they did and the sort of how much they liked the job. And I guess how much they liked their jobs is probably why I ended up being a doctor.
Right. So that's why you ended up traveling around the world then at an early age?
Yeah, they took us out to Kenya where they were working. And then subsequently, when I finished uni, then I just took a few years off. I basically tended to work 6 months on, 6 months off. So I was doing 6 months of medical stuff, which is like retrieval, A&E, anaesthetics, etc. And then 6 months where I'd just bum around and go running or going cycling or climb and stuff like that as well. So it was nice, pretty much 50% medicine, 50% sort of adventure racing and doing other things. And it was a good time.
So when you grew up you were born in Scotland then. So what made you want to study at Aberdeen?
The football team. I was living in Edinburgh, and Aberdeen's a good part of the world. It's Costa del Don. It's actually one of the sunniest places in Scotland, if such a place exists. The football team are there. A few of my mates were going to Aberdeen, so it made logical sense at the time. Good medical school as well.
Yeah. And then, so when you were at that, did you have an idea, like how into running were you? I presume you were still doing a lot of running when you were studying.
No, not at all. When I was growing up, I played like loads of different sports. So I played like tennis, cricket, squash, badminton, like sort of county level, and then played a whole lot of other sports. So anything that I could hit or throw or do, I would. University, I played a bit of football, played a bit of tennis, played a bit of other sports. I never really ran until I was maybe about 25. And I kind of used to climb first, so we used to go up a whole lot of hills, but it's obviously faster and you can do more hills in a day if you run. So I used to just run up hills or run up mountains and whatever. And a couple of my mates that I started doing that with were runners and said that I could maybe like do some races or see some different parts of the world that way. So the first run that I ever kind of did was something called the Marathon des Sables. So it's like 250k race through the desert in Morocco over 5 or 6 days, and I wasn't particularly well prepared. I just come off climbing Aconcagua, which is the highest mountain in South America, like 6,900 meters. Came down the week after, was due to do the Marathon des Sables, turned up with entirely the wrong shoes, entirely the wrong clothing, some sunscreen. So that was a start, and had to borrow some gaiters and some food and stuff like that from people on the start line. And it was generally a bit of a shambles. So I managed to get to the finish, and various people started to offer me sponsorship and stuff like that. So immediately after that, I started to think that rather than just climbing and doing all that other stuff, then I could perhaps go and see parts of the world running. So I've been fortunate enough to race at the North Pole, Antarctica, Indonesia, Mongolia, across the deserts in Namibia, and it's beautiful. You know, running is pretty much my way of seeing the world. So rather than doing set races or set marathons, which are great also, I typically just pick a place that was a bit remote and wild and I really wanted to see. And either I'd enter a race there or be entered, or sometimes you just set an expedition up. So, but again, I guess a lot of planning goes into the races, and I'd say 9 times out of 10 I was pretty efficient in terms of my sports science, sports medicine, because again I had great colleagues that could pretty much tell me what to do in terms of nutrition, hydration, recovery, but I'd still make some pretty glaring errors. I remember going to Namibia, and one of my colleagues who works in TV said that no one had ran across the full length of the Namibian desert, so it was like 550k from one bit to the other, and it would be a good thing to do. So I said, oh, that's fine, and that we'd perhaps do it in a couple of months, because I had a couple of weeks off. 10 days is basically what you needed. And rocked up and just thought, man, it's like an oven here. It's unbelievably hot. Felt like some roast beef. And then thought, hang on, actually, January seemed like a good idea when I was in Scotland, but of course it's the Southern Hemisphere. So you're running through the hottest desert in the world in the middle of their summer as a ginger Scotsman. So yeah, we made it through, but it was perhaps a bit harder than it might have been in winter, or what passes for winter in the desert.
Yeah. So what do you think has driven you to want to do these extreme things then? Because again, some of the things you've mentioned, which I saw in there, just that, yeah, they're definitely not conventional.
I think part of it is seeing the world. So seeing parts of the world I hadn't seen or would really like to go back to. So that's a prime motivation for a lot of it.
I mean, you can see parts of the world without running through, without running it there as well.
Yeah, you can, but it's not the same. So you're faster running than walking, so you can see more. And you really would struggle to take, cars to the likes of the North Pole or to the middle of deserts or jungles and stuff like that as well. So really, it's a fantastic form of transport. So I guess there's that, seeing the world. Second thing is there's a number of charities that I'm pretty passionate about, and we've been able to raise a good amount of cash for. So that's definitely an element of it. But I think it's also a sense of purpose. The human body loves a sense of purpose. It needs to be up to something. There's only so many days you can lie in bed or, watch Jeremy Kyle and stuff. So I think it gives you something to do. It gets you up in the morning. It gets you motivated. We know that regular physical activity is one of the best things that you can do for your health. And actually, if you can do that running, squash, whatever, then it's just doing something. So I would do it for that purpose. And then essentially, it's hell of tough during the time. You can imagine that when you start on the start line, there's a degree of apprehension. The first half of any day or the first half of any challenge is generally good fun, and you're looking around seeing stuff. But then it just gets hard, and every step becomes a bit of a burden. But essentially, at the finish line, the rose-tinted spectacles come on. You get the beer in your hand, and you just think, what's next? Rather than just an hour ago, you're suffering and thinking that it was pretty much the highway to hell, and then stuff gets better. So I think it's kind of quite addictive. But I've got 3 kids that are 7, 5, and 3 now, so I'm doing more recreational stuff and things that are more based in Scotland, just to make sure that I'm around a bit more.
Yeah. And then when you're doing these things, then do you do it with other people, or is it you by yourself?
Bit of a mixture. So I guess the sort of first biggest one that I did was I ran from John O'Groats to the Sahara Desert, which is like 4,300 kilometers. And that's a fairly good example. So I did run it by myself. I was the only runner that ran it all. But again, we're promoting the value of physical activity for health. So we had tons of fun runs. We had a good fun run over the West Highland Way. We had a good fun run in Edinburgh and Peebles and in Melrose and various parts of England and down through France and Morocco itself. And I had friends join me for parts of the journey. I do enjoy it where you've got people that can share their journey with you. It's a bit more interesting rather than just sitting and listening to music or listening to your own farts. So it's but I guess there's not that many folk that are keen to run all the way to the Sahara Desert or to do X or Y as well. Often you've got like other people with you, so you're really completely by yourself. Sometimes I'll have Jenny, who's my wife, with me for parts that she'll enjoy seeing different things, or mates that run as well. So again, across the Namibian desert with Donnie Campbell, I ran across East Africa and up those various hills there with Donnie. I've done various runs with a guy called Joe Simmons, who's again a far better runner than myself, or at least faster. So it's kind of a mix, and then obviously there's the races, the North Pole Marathon, Antarctica, Mongolia races, Indonesian races. These are all races. So essentially you're getting from A to B along with 10 other people, 100 other people, or 1,000 other people, just depending how big the race is or how many people want to line up.
Yeah, I mean, they all sound really like just random but massively interesting places. I love traveling as well. And it's like the one that you'd won the North Pole Marathon. Like, what's that like doing that?
Yeah, it's a fantastic race. So the race organizer, Richard Donovan, owns the North Pole Marathon, the Ice Marathon, and various others, and all of his races are worth doing. I don't know where's next, maybe space, but he puts on fantastic races. And as I understand it, it's a good way to get to the North Pole. So you fly in via North Norway, and there's a sort of an ice jet that lands close enough to the North Pole, and then either you race to the pole or there's a helicopter that will take you to where the floating base is. But it's very, very difficult to land flights there, and it is cold. There's no two ways about that. You're camping out in the North Pole, you race, you huddle around in very comfortable circumstances given what is there, and then obviously people talk about polar bears and talk about all sorts of things, but again, it's fantastic races that Richard puts on. The North Pole Marathon, the Antarctic Ice Marathon are unbelievably beautiful. Like when you actually fly down and look out the window and just see the different shapes that white can take, it's incredible. And then of course in Antarctica with icebergs, and it's a great place to be. And again, it was good conditions for polar running when I was there. It was I think only -25 at the North Pole, or maybe -30, and then like -25 for the Antarctic one. And you just wrap up like an onion. It's just lots of little layers of clothing that essentially you can peel off if needed, and you don't end up wearing that much. Like in Antarctica, I was wearing like a thermal and like a light jumper, and a couple of pairs of pretty light trousers, but you have to cover every inch of flesh, so you're having to wear a balaclava and pretty decent gloves. And the other big challenge you've got when you're racing in polar environments is that essentially all your food freezes, so you're pretty much eating ice blocks. But I think it's an easier environment to race in the extreme cold, where you can just wear more clothes than the extreme heat, where you can't really peel off your skin or that. And I'm quite big, like I'm 6'2", so I guess racing in the extreme heat is quite big for someone of my height.
And then what are you actually running on then? So you mentioned about like icebergs and stuff. Like, how sure are you that you've got like a good footing?
Oh, the races are incredibly safe. They've been mapped out. They've got people checking things. You are nervous when you take a step and then you kind of hear the water slapping back up against the ice, but it's 6 or 7 feet thick, and they've looked for leads, etc. And you've got different options to wear on your feet if you're running through snow. Probably be the same if you're out in the hills in the Peak District or the lakes or Wales or Scotland, but you can either wear snowshoes if it's really thick, and that's basically the choice if the snow is pretty heavy, or you can wear like golf shoes or shoes with spikes. So I was working with Merrill at the time, and they used to create me special shoes, which is great. Or you can just wear normal running shoes, but a size bigger. So you've got a couple of 2 or 3 pairs of socks that you can fit in there to make sure that your feet don't get frostbite. And I got a bit of frostbite when I was racing in far north Canada a separate time. So I broke my tibia, and so I was a bit slower completing the second part of the race than I'd like, limping a bit. And got a bit of frostbite in my nose, my hand, etc. It was a bit miserable.
And then how do you, when you get frostbite in your nose then, so you're continuing to run, like what is the impact of that then, and that after the race as well?
Oh, the frostbite was fine. That was on the ice road. There's a program called Ice Road Truckers that used to do the rounds. And if you go a bit north of that, then there's a race in far North Canada that ends up in the Arctic Ocean. Beautiful, really, really nice. It's called the 6633. And the frostbite, because I was running reasonably quickly to start with, but I stress fractured my tibia, which slowed me down considerably. So when you're able to generate less heat, then you're moving less quickly. So the amount of clothes that I had were probably not sufficient for me moving slower for the second part of the race. So I wasn't actually that fussed by the frostbite. I was more bothered by the fact that my leg was extremely sore. And it's the worst day of my life, honestly, you know. I've had a few injuries and a few broken bones and stuff like that, but having to run through the Arctic with a fractured tibia wasn't a huge amount of fun.
Was there any thought that did you know that you'd done it at that point?
Yeah, you know straight away. I guess you'll know as an expert physio, myself as a clinician, when you break a finger at cricket or where you roll your ankle and you know you've done your ligaments, when you broke your nose, you know, it's obvious enough what's happened. But it's interesting. You're just like, oh, that's what it feels like. But I'd made a mistake, so I'd ran the distance and was comfortable with the distance. But in the Arctic, for those races having to carry a sled, you're having to be self-sufficient. So it's not much in the way of other people around. So you're having to carry a sled with all your food, your sleeping bags, etc. So I was running a lot more anteriorly, so leaning forward a lot more to run and to pull the sledge. Because of that, rather than the usual Achilles tendinopathy that I'd get, I was getting anterior issues, so dorsiflexic tenosynovitis. But I could feel this. I could feel my tibia grumbling. I could feel like, you know, stress. And I remember stopping after, you know, like 40 or 50 miles and thinking, oh, that's a stress reaction. Because it was in one place rather than a more general periostitis and a more diffuse pain. And then suddenly it went bang, you know, like after 100 miles. It was just like, that's gone. So I was immediately sick. It's sore enough to make me sick. And then you're just like, well, you know, there's no one else around. Just have to crack on, get to the finish line, and then basically stick the leg in there and feel miserable. But no, you could. It's like many other things. You just know straight away.
Yeah. No, I suppose there's not many options really. If you're kind of isolated out there, you've got to just get through it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, you could get picked up by the occasional person or vehicle that comes past, but oh, it's beautiful. That's the thing as well, right? You know, because all these places, I think the UK's got some of the most beautiful places on earth. But if you imagine the scene, you've got the Northern Lights dancing in front of you. The sun comes up. You've got a beautiful sunrise over, you know, the Tooth Mountains and stuff like that. Mountains that are far higher than what we've got in the UK. You've got Arctic foxes. You've got like hares and all sorts of wildlife. It's, you know, it's crazy beautiful. So I think that's the thing that keeps you going, is being able to see stuff, and then also a degree fear of embarrassment, thinking that you've gone all the way over, you know, invested a bit of time in training and stuff, and then not getting the job done.
Yeah. Well, I want to see the Northern Lights, but I'm not sure I'll be doing it in the same way that you did it. So
go to Aberdeen, you get them there.
Yeah, I might do that. So, and then one of the things I was really intrigued by was it said in 2012 that you did 7 ultramarathons in over 7 continents. So over what time period was that then?
Yeah. So I went out and raced in Antarctica. So I raced in the Antarctic Ice Marathon, and I had to race fairly hard as well. Like I just won that and no more, and then pretty much immediately had to set off and just run another 50k. So I was running just an ultra on each of the 7 continents in under a week. So, like, you know, the running of that is okay. And again, you get to see some incredible things, you know, Antarctica, Patagonia or Argentina, Atlanta for the marathon course in America, which was a logistics decision, London, which again was in and around the Olympics. So, and then the Great Pyramids of Egypt, Dubai, which is incredible. I love Dubai, and then Sydney and the Opera House, etc. So actually, the running itself was okay. Although I was tired having raced hard even prior to starting. But it's just logistics. I mean, again, Richard did a terrific job in managing the events out there. and getting aircraft into Antarctica on time for the races and to take the climbers out and stuff. So really grateful to him, having done something fairly similar before with marathons rather than ultra marathons, and he's a great runner. Then eventually we did it in, I think, 5.5 days it took for all the logistics, and then to get 50k done in each location, finishing in Sydney, where I fell asleep in the harbour ferry for about 8 hours apparently. Woke up covered in dribble and pretty tired and jet lagged, because you're constantly planning, because I had roughly where I might run mapped out, but I wasn't quite sure, because it might depend if a flight was delayed or where you could get into and all that type of thing. So you're constantly planning, you're constantly eating when you're on flights rather than sleeping. You're having to plan a route for the next country. You're having to charge all your devices, your phones, your Garmins, just to prove that you ran 50k, because some people might not believe you, etc. So it was good in that I can sleep on a bed of nails now. So whenever I'm flying, then I have no difficulty sleeping after that experience. But amazing. I mean, it's kind of darkest before dawn. I was absolutely wrecked in Egypt. You're like 5 ultras in, slept like 5 or 6 hours in 4 nights. I slept okay between Egypt and Dubai, but before that I hadn't really slept, and I was just getting overtaken by donkeys and stuff like that. And then the light comes up over Cheops Pyramid. You see the Sphinx here. It's like, wow, amazing.
But you literally did it within 7 days, because that's what I couldn't get my head around. So you managed to get the flights, the run, everything in within 7 days.
Yeah. It was logistically, it was really difficult. The running itself took care of itself.
God, that is insane. That is incredible. And then I was also really intrigued. I love the name of the Genghis Khan Ice Marathon. But like, what's Mongolia like to run around?
You have to go there. It's like a different world, and it's actually like 2 different worlds. So if you go in summer, again, it's extremely hot. Because it's so continental, it's like 35 degrees in summer and -30, -35 in winter. So you've got the Gobi Desert, you've got the sense of space, you've got people out there who are incredibly welcoming and just great people. And again, we were able to raise about 100k for the Yama Trust with various runs. So was just really keen to get out there and return some of the hospitality we'd previously had. I raced out in Mongolia back in the day, and it's a company called Sandbaggers that put on some fantastic races, and arrived at the finish line just ahead of the rest of the group, and so there wasn't much there. But there were 3 girls out in the middle of nowhere, like literally in the middle of nowhere, and they couldn't have looked after you any better. Would you like anything to eat? Would you like anything to drink? Telling stories. It's basically a big game of charades, but the people of Mongolia are incredibly kind and very, very generous. And again, in winter, you've got ice fishing, you can hire a load of huskies, you can just have all sorts of adventures out there. I think we had the coldest burn supper, or out on out where Genghis Khan, who's a fairly notorious tyrant, but is popular out there. But I think it was near where he was born, ran from there and then down into the modern day capital of Ulaanbaatar.
I think we're back again. You mentioned your role about working with the Scottish Government around physical activity. How did that come about?
I was promoting the benefits of physical activity pretty strongly through some of the running that I was doing, because I think it's one of the best things that you can do for your health. But I'm from Scotland, so I like a bargain, and you're 30% less likely to die early. You're between 30 and 70% less likely to get heart attacks, strokes, type 2 diabetes, hip fractures, colon cancer, loads of stuff that is very bad for physical health, but also from a mental health perspective. Regular physical activity can prevent and treat depression, dementia, and other things that are a real burden for individuals. And I think we made a documentary for the BBC when I ran to the Sahara Desert, and myself and colleagues were talking about it and stuff. So I spoke to the Chief Medical Officer for Scotland, a guy called Harry Burns, who's a huge inspiration, a great guy, and made a huge difference to health in Scotland when he was working there, as have future CMOs who've been terrific also. But just invited to go and work for the Scottish Government as their physical activity champion. It's a really created post, working just supporting policy, so developing policy. How can we get more people more active more often with the ministers, with the doctors and the civil servants there? It was great. I must admit, I thought government would be quite boring and it'd be full of suits, but in fact there were some great people that were doing great work and actually making a real concrete difference. So still enjoy providing some support on certain areas, but again, I think that Scotland has done a good job on physical activity policy, thanks to guys like Harry and subsequently Kath Calderwood, Gregor Smith, and these other docs that have kind of shown some real leadership on it. I think if we have got an opportunity as physios, as doctors, as other people that are interested, it really is something that can make a huge difference. I mean, if you think of the best present we've ever given our kids, you know, I've given them all sorts of stuff, like in terms of bikes and footballs and computer games and dolls and just looking around. But actually, can you imagine a present that can extend your life by an average of 7 years, something that can make people more productive and far happier? So I guess if we increase physical activity in the UK and globally, it would increase gross national happiness or gross global happiness, which I think can only be a good thing at this point.
Yeah, no, that summarises it really well, actually. And then in terms of like, how did you get involved with? Well, obviously, were you a high-profile person because you're a doctor, but you were also doing these extreme things? Is that how it all came together?
I think there's a degree of profile there. We had made a couple of films for the BBC and for various other broadcasters, and we're doing a good amount of work at the time. And there was interest.
And how does that come about, though? How does it come about that you've made those programmes?
Sometimes you'd approach a broadcaster you'd previously worked with and said, "I've got this idea. I'm gonna go and run across the Namibian desert, go and run across East Africa and up Kilimanjaro and all that type of stuff." And sometimes they'd come to you and say, "Would you be interested in doing this challenge, or have you got any ideas?" So bit of a mixture there. You know, it depends on the broadcaster, but I think it was a good mechanism by which to promote exercise. It was good fun at the time. You know, you get to do some great stuff. You pretty much sit around, have a beer or a cup of tea, and just discuss places in the world you could go and challenges you could take on. And then these guys help you execute it without you having to do too much of the planning. It's brilliant. So I kind of miss that. But now that my kids are, well, now that I have got 3 kids rather than 0 kids, then it's balancing stuff at the moment.
And when you're doing that, if you've got, say, the BBC doing a programme on you, so are you spending that entire time together with the production team?
Well, if you take the run to the Sahara, then it was 78 days, so running a total of 78 days, an average of, I think, 34, 35 miles a day with no days off. And there was times that there was good content, so they'd obviously film the start, they'd film a lot of the fun runs, they'd film when you're going over various hills or mountains, they'd film when you're in Edinburgh or London or, you know, really prominent places, and of course at the finish. So they're probably with me about half of the time, or maybe 2/5 of the time. And at other times, essentially, you'd carry GoPros or other cameras, or people that were looking after you would have some mobile units and stuff. And then often it just happens to be that the race that you're competing in is being filmed. So, for example, you talked about the North Pole Marathon, where Channel 5 are making a film for when I was racing, and sometimes they'll feature people in particular or whatever. So I think it's a bit of a mixture. I can't quite remember the question, but in general terms, if you're doing a single stage race, then typically there'll be cameras there quite a lot. If it's a much longer ordeal, then maybe half the time. And it depends on the terrain as well. I mean, sometimes it's quite difficult to get film crews into certain locations. They'll tend to meet you at areas that are more accessible, and then you'll carry cameras for when you're up in the sand dunes, or you'll carry cameras when you're in other places, and that's been quite good fun. There have been times that there's been, you know, other people doing other challenges that have helped a little bit with the filming of, just because they've needed someone to reach inaccessible places.
And then, Phil, like, how did the book come about? Was that something that you'd always planned when you go to do the run to the Sahara?
No. Again, I hadn't written any books before. I had been asked to write a number of articles for various newspapers or magazines and stuff like that, either as an interview or sometimes you're commissioned to write a piece for the Times or Geographic or the Telegraph or whatever. So I was writing for various agencies when I was on the move, because you know you can't run for 24 hours a day, so you've got plenty of time to do other stuff. And the book, a few people suggested it and asked, and then basically just had an offer to write a book, and I was more than happy to do so. It was nice, actually. It was a nice way just to kind of remember stuff. And again, there was some great pictures that the team took, and Triple Echo were very generous in terms of the footage that they'd filmed for the BBC. They made a lot of that available in terms of stills for the books and stuff like that as well. So the first book I wrote was just about some running that I'd done, and then the second one's just about some lessons I'd learned in terms of treating or assisting people with injuries that you've got, or preventing running injuries. Because I think running injuries are pretty predictable. You know, you can pretty much tell based on, unless you've got an acute injury, so someone sprains an ankle or whatever, the sort of overload injuries where you've got people increasing their volume, increasing their intensity of exercise, if they've got different biomechanical factors, either internally or externally, and Andy Franklin Miller's done some good work on this, you can pretty much predict when injuries will occur and roughly what they might be. And then, obviously, once they do occur, unless it's a stress fracture, then you can also work out how to make them better. So again, like when I ran to the Sahara, I had horrendous Achilles tendinopathy after about 10 days. Spoke to a podiatrist, he gave me some great advice, and essentially just ran slightly differently, and ended up having dorsiflex or tenosynovitis. So it was just management. I didn't have to change the amount I was running, really. I was just changing the terrain and changing the mechanics of it. So the second book was just sharing some insights as to how people can either avoid getting injured in the first place, or to try and avoid not having to run when they do get injured, just by making little changes. Although obviously if you've got a stress fracture, then it's game over until that heals.
Yeah. Yeah, and then so for running beyond limits, then was that something that you'd put together after you'd come back? Then it wasn't like you were keeping a journal or anything as you were doing the actual race.
I was keeping a journal of sorts, in terms of I knew where I was, keeping places on the map, and again we had a pretty good record of it from our TV colleagues. And I was also taking part in a scientific experiment as well. So Ricardo Costa and the University of Melbourne were doing some work looking at what effect that would have on my intake, how much eating I was doing, what I was drinking, and body composition, iron levels, all this sort of stuff. So basically, I managed not to lose any weight. I didn't drink a sip of water throughout the actual race, so it's just all calories. It's chocolate milkshakes or other things that are fairly nutrient dense, eating about 8,000 calories a day, so about enough for a hippopotamus apparently. And I managed to bomb my iron levels. I think started at 140 and ended up with ferritin of 4 and was a bit anemic and all these sort of things. So all fairly predictable stuff, but the university did a great job of writing that up. And so yeah, I was keeping a journal of sorts, and I was keeping fairly accurate food diaries and fairly accurate other bits of information for scientific purposes.
Yeah, no, it sounds an interesting diet, but I guess that's necessary in those conditions.
Yes, yeah. It's sometimes I was eating pretty well and pretty scientifically, and other times it's just what you had access to.
Yeah, at least it wasn't frozen there anyway.
Yes, yeah.
So, and then in terms of the actual jobs that you've had, like what attracts you to those sort of roles, to anything that you've worked in a number of different areas, but what are the key drivers for you? You've obviously got a passion for the different extreme things, but what drives you for the actual day job, so to speak?
The jobs I've got at present, the European Tour Group, golf, so that's the DP World Tour Challenge Tour, Legends Tour, Ryder Cup Europe, Ryder Cup Performance Institutes. They're great because you're delivering golf events. They're essentially like golf leagues, but you're also trying to advance science through the European Tour Performance Institute. So you're working out what can actually help guys hit the ball further or closer to the hole, what can prevent and treat illness. So it's really good in terms of the strategy. It's good in terms of the operational management because we've got a fantastic team, fantastic physiotherapists, strength and conditioning, nutrition, sports science, doctors, skin screening, all the different services we have. But then also just in terms of moving the science on, it's a great organisation to work for. Similar to the RNA, who are the global governing body for golf, that do some work and some research and development for. But also, when the golf tournaments are generally in nice places, so typically you're going to an attractive part of the world that you can take in, you can see a bit of the world yourself, and then you're working with great people. Again, I love working in football, I love working in rugby and the Olympic sports, which I've done a lot of previously, but I love my current job in golf, partly due to the fact you're going to nice places, you're working with great folks, and the science and the opportunity to take stuff forward is very strong.
And do you work with the players regularly then, or is it more on that scientific study basis?
Yeah, so I guess I'm overall responsible for our strategy. So how we can combat COVID, what can we do in terms of looking after the players' illness, injury. There's then the management. So overall look after the sort of medical team. So physios and strength and conditioning come under my great colleague Rob Hillman, but I look after nutrition, sports science, medical, tournament doctors, COVID, all that stuff. And then there is the science, but in that we are looking after the players day in, day out. So we would have, for example, today we've got a tournament in South Africa on Challenge Tour. We've got a tournament in Qatar on the DP World Tour. And we tend to have 2 or 3 events running concurrently that typically I'll go to 10 to 12 tournaments per year, or do 10 to 12 full weeks. I'll visit some of the other tournaments. And then you spend a lot of time on Zoom or WhatsApp or Teams with the players as well. If they've got a wrist injury, a back injury, they've got a question about illness, or can they travel, and all of these sort of things.
And how does it work if they with their own medical teams, or these players that don't have that?
I think again on the DP World Tour, we would tend to try and work very, very closely with their doctors, their physiotherapists, their strength and conditioning coaches, their nutritionists, their psychologists, their short game coach, the long game coach, their managers, etc. They'll typically have a bit of a team around them. But it'd be quite unusual for these guys to travel to tournaments. So quite often, I guess we've got pretty good golf-specific knowledge. And often you'll have their physio or their doc reach out when players are away from tournaments. I guess the vast majority of players at tournaments, I think, there's maybe 1 or 2 players that have brought doctors occasionally over the years, but pretty much it'll be up to yourself, and then you'll try and keep their doctor at home abreast of the situation. From a physiotherapy perspective, again, there's some fantastic practitioners we have on DP World Tour and European Tour Group. There's also some fantastic private practitioners that support the players. And hopefully you kind of work as a team just to get stuff done together to work out how that player can best be advantaged from a health or performance. So I'd say, there's pretty reasonable harmony there. And I think, again, it's just working out what's best for the athlete, and then sometimes for the team as well. If you've got Ryder Cup, for example, then every 2 years, then it's a much smaller group that you're looking at after in a tournament, and you're getting a lot more down into the detail of mattresses, of curtains, of pre-bed snacks for each individual, etc., rather than it being a sort of a bigger approach. So you could almost have it like our services are like the NHS, and there's private services that the players might take on top of that, but it's quite comprehensive. I'm proud of what Roger Hawkes, my predecessor, Rob Hillman and the other guys have set up, which in addition to the research and development includes regular skin screening with our partner Signpost, regular cardiovascular screening again through Signpost. We've got hand and wrist experts, radiologists, nutritionists, physios, S&C doctors, all at tournaments that can support players. So if there is stuff that we can assist them with, then hopefully we're pretty well placed.
Is this based across Europe or is it all UK based?
We play in 34 different countries. So the tournaments are in Qatar and South Africa this week. Next week, again, we're in South Africa and Tanzania. So the organisation is headquartered in the UK, but it's a global set of tours, be that on the DP World Tour, the Challenge Tour, Legends Tour, and also the Ladies European Tour, who I provide some support into also. Right,
yeah, that sounds great. So are you a golf man yourself then? Is that why you're so into it?
What did I say to that? I love golf, so I've started playing it a bit more. I never really had played a huge amount prior to that, but you will have the opportunity to play sometimes in the evenings or in and around events, etc., or with corporate partners, etc. And I love it, but I don't think the professional golfers would have a high regard for the standard of my golf, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, and then so in terms of the other roles, then, so you've done some work in football. How do those things come about?
Again, I work pretty much full time for golf and with the university at present, but previously I've supported the Sports Scotland Institute of Sport, Scottish Rugby, Celtic, Hearts, various other sports organisations. I've had the chance to work at Olympics, Paralympics, etc. And it's great, you know, that's the thing with working with different sports is you learn so much from each organisation you work from, with the practitioners, physio colleagues, S&C colleagues, doctors, sports science, etc. So it's a real education. So I enjoy doing that, and we will catch up on a twice weekly basis with my colleagues from FIFA, from the IOC, from World Rugby, from ATP, from F1, and just go through things from a medical and scientific perspective and see what lessons we can take from F1 or from tennis, etc. They're pretty similar to golf, you know, they're a real travelling circus. They're in a different place each week. So I think football, again, I love playing football. I've got the touch of a snooker cushion, so I enjoyed being in and around football. Rugby, again, I enjoyed playing when I was younger. Didn't have a huge amount of talent, but I've got enormous respect for what these guys do and how they play and the quality, the provision that Scottish Rugby put in for them. So I guess I'm just sports mad. I like working in different sports. I like being at different sports. I like working with and seeing how things work, and it's fascinating. Golf is so fascinating because of all the stats. Like, there's so much stats that come out of the back of it that is interesting for people like me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what do you think's the next thing for you then? Have you got any particular projects that you want to work on, whether it's to do with your sports medicine or with athletic challenges?
I think the first thing for me is family. So my youngest is 3, and Sonny had a pretty tough year. So first year of his life, he spent a good 5 or 6 months in intensive care, and he had various heart defects fixed, and, you know, amazing how well he was looked after by the NHS. So Sonny is thriving. He's doing well. He's still got some additional needs, and I'm just trying to spend a good amount of time at home, and it's great fun. I don't know if you've got kids yourself, Andy, but I just love having Nina, Fran, and Sonny, and Jenny, of course, keeping me right. So that's kind of the first thing. Second thing is from work. I love the clinical stuff. So I love working with the athletes and love managing services and love the research and development aspects of it. So the work with the European Tour Group and the RNA and the guys I work with at the University of Edinburgh is perfect at present, and I'm very, very happy there. And thirdly, I think it's kind of collaboration. If there's one thing that the pandemic has shown is that you really can learn a lot from others that might not appear directly relevant. So you learn a lot from Formula One, or you learn a lot from tennis, or you learn a lot from football, but you learn a lot from business partners as well. So actually being at events and speaking to different folk as to how they manage processes, or what they've done, or how something led to improvement, or how things made people happier. So I think hopefully some time with family. I'm pretty happy with my work situation at present, and then also just thinking how you can collaborate a bit more widely. I haven't done a huge amount of running. I still, I live in Scotland. It's great. You can go up into the hills. I'm doing more recreational stuff rather than things that are further afield. And it's probably about time. I hadn't properly explored Scotland, so there's plenty to see and do here.
Yeah, that sounds a lot. Out of interest, what sort of books do you like to read? Like, are you into self-development books and things?
Well, I've just read Horrid Henry, which is my 7-year-old's one. Horrid Henry's just had to wear some rainbow and some sparkly pants to work, so I'm hoping to avoid that mistake. So I actually love reading books to kids just because they're so engaged, they love it, they're laughing all the time. In terms of books myself, I have just got into audiobooks, so quite often I'm out for a run for a few hours, then you can just listen to Michael Palin going around the Himalayas. I love travel books, anything to do with travel is great. Quite interested in sport, quite interested in self-development as well. And I probably just like doing something. So whether it's reading a book or audiobook or anything, I'll quite often have the AirPods in when I'm running around in the hills. How about yourself, Andy? What recommendations have you got for myself or for listeners?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I do a lot of self-development books, and I've got this thing now, which you it's not for everyone, but it's called Blinkist. So basically it abbreviates self-development books because there's hundreds that I want to read, but it abbreviates it into about either 16 minutes of audio or into, say, 7 chapters, and it's like an abbreviation. Then I make my own notes on it. So I'll send you some of my favourite ones after this. But yeah, there's absolutely loads that I like. That's trying to think of ones that I've done, like Outwitting the Devil, which is what a previous guest told me to look at, which was fascinating. And it was written in I think it was the 20s, but it wasn't released until about 10 years ago because the views were so controversial about what the church and schools were imprinting on kids. That was really interesting. And a lot of it is a similar principle in terms of positive thinking, shutting out negative thoughts. And I was listening to a podcast with Dave Brailsford this morning, and very similar things, really.
Brilliant. And what's that called again?
So the book is called Outwitting the Devil. I'll send you my notes if you're interested, and you can have a look at it. And it kind of breaks it down into different chapters. But I thought that was really good.
Perfect. And you said the resource is called Blinklist.
Blinkist, it's called, yeah. So basically, you pay a subscription, and then it's got a lot of different business books on there, normally self-development ones. And I find it really good. I always make time to do at least 1 or ideally 2 a week. And some of them, don't always resonate, but it gives you a different perspective. So I find it really useful.
Brilliant. I think the other things I've found quite helpful recently is I think that the stuff that actually helps athletes most are probably the things that also help people in general life. So it's the usual things. It's like simple but not easy. So sleep like a champion, eat like a champion, get some physical activity, judicious use of caffeine. I mean, these are all things that can make a really concrete difference to the general public and can make a difference to athletes, but it's something I'm trying to do a better job on myself. So again, with 3 kids and all that goes on, and sometimes I used to cut sleep a bit or used to eat all sorts of rubbish, but I'm trying to make a bit of an effort on those 2 things. So I'm reading a bit about sleep and nutrition at the moment.
I was actually just bought a book from a colleague. It was my birthday at the weekend, so he bought me a book on sleep. So it's quite thick. I'm not used to doing a full book these days because I do Blinkist. So yeah, what are your thoughts on sleep then? So what would you recommend? Because I tried cutting sleep, but then I'm like back up to my ideally 8 hours now. But what are your thoughts on it?
I think there's consistent and growing evidence that at least 7 and probably more hours sleep is beneficial, not only for health and performance. So for medium term health, but also for long term health. But in terms of how athletes perform, And that's a major issue we face in golf as well, just because the guys are playing sometimes in a different continent each week without the time to adjust properly. So I think that in general, a good amount of sleep is good. There are some simple concrete things that can be done that are really important in terms of having a routine, avoiding caffeine after 2 p.m, making sure that your room is dark and quiet, and all of those good things. And then I think it's also about travel planning. If you are traveling a lot, particularly if you're traveling sideways, like to either America or to Asia rather than to, say, South Africa, then I think just working out the strategies around that are really, really important. And something that I think that we learn a lot from the likes of the NBA. Like even in America, they're traveling a lot, East Coast, West Coast, multiple times each week, and just thinking how to manage travel and how to manage sleep around that.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. I think I read somewhere that Roger Federer does between 10 and 12 hours a day of sleep.
Yeah, and I guess Kenya is interesting for that. So I worked out in E10, which is the home of the champions, and I think again it was something like 86 of the top 100 marathon runners that year all came from a 40k radius. Incredible. And I think Mo Farah was our fastest marathon runner that year, and there were 19 Kenyans from that village that had run a faster marathon that month than his fastest marathon time. So, I mean, he's a great example of someone that does sleep like a champion, so really does prioritize sleep. And likewise, the Kenya athletes, their best athletes are all fantastic runners, but fantastic sleepers as well. They'll all really prioritize it. They'll make sure they're getting adequate rest and recovery. Some of them are sleeping 8 or 9 hours. The record I saw was one of their female Olympic gold medalists was sleeping between 12 and 14 per day and was doing it. And not even like roosters or any of that sort of stuff could wake her up. It's incredible.
That is a skill. It's a skill in itself, isn't it? That being able to sleep well.
Yeah, yeah.
So, last question: who would you say has been the most influential, or I mean, feel free to name more than one, but who's the biggest influence in your life and career?
Probably family. Like I like spending time with my family, be that my brothers and sisters and parents and wife and kids. Like Jenny's amazing. I think they've always really supported my running and my medical stuff, which at times has been difficult, particularly when different things need picked up at different times. I think professionally, again, I've had like lots of great doctors that I've worked with, the likes of Dr. Roger Hawkes, Brian Walker, Niall Elliott, John McLean, James Robson are all terrific mentors. They've really taught me a lot. But similarly, I've benefited a lot from colleagues as physiotherapists, strength and conditioning, and there are too many to mention, but Rob Hillman, who I work very closely with at the DP World Tour and European Tour Group at present, is an amazing physio, but also just a great guy. Always somebody you can sit down at the end of the day and just work stuff through with.
Very good. No, I said that was the last question, but it's not the last question actually. So in terms of when you're doing these marathons, what's like the time differential between doing a normal one compared to one in sub-zero or in extreme heat?
Depends how far it is. So typically, if you're running a marathon in say 2:30, then 100k you might run 7:20 or so. So the longer it is, the slower you are really. And then it depends on the surface. If you're running on like a very flat surface, then that's fine. If you're running through deep sand dunes or deep snow, then you're obviously a lot slower and proportionate. And then it depends a bit on the temperature. The cold doesn't really make that much of a difference, to be honest. It's more the fact that you're either running on ice, which is quite slippy, or through deep snow. But if you're in the extreme heat, then you have to slow down, particularly when you get to 37 degrees. Until 37 degrees, I'm kind of okay. But as soon as you get over 37 degrees, then the environment is giving heat to you rather than the other way around. And you must slow down. You just can't run at the same pace as you normally would.
Yeah. No, well, yeah, I think that's a good note to finish on, because I think running any distance in 37 degree heat is is something that I'm not keen on. But no, that's been honestly a fascinating chat here. So Andrew, I really appreciate your time on it, and I definitely will come up and I'll send you those notes that I've had from Blinkist.
Brilliant. Thanks, Millen. Andy, great to catch up, and congrats on a fantastic series of podcasts. It's been great having the chance to listen to several of them.
Oh, brilliant. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Cheers, Andrew.
Cheers. Thanks.